Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jessie Rosenberg from the Fragrance Foundation UK, and let's talk about fragrance. One of the biggest challenges within the fragrance industry is communicating scents effectively. How do we cross that barrier, cross that screen that's in the way, and really connect the scent to the people? Today, we are lucky to be joined by the 2022 Jasmine Award winners, experts in translating smells, who will provide their insights into how we can successfully communicate with audiences and fragrance lovers by breaking down the jargon and focusing on the themes that matter. We are joined by Alistair Park, winner of our Creativity Award, Joe Fairley, winner of our Literary Award, Hayden Williams, Rising Star Award winner, and Amanda Carr and Tamara Fulton, winners of Practical Guide. A big thank you to our 2022 Jasmine Award winners for joining us today. So let's jump right in. I would love to know what it is that captures your interest. So Alice, what is it that makes you decide that a product, an ingredient, or a trend is worth looking at? Oh, sorry, Alice, you're still on mute. There you go.
You'd think after 3 years we'd know not to do that anymore. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining this. This is so exciting. It's like the dream coffee morning, isn't it? What is it that makes me decide if a product is sort of worth kind of talking about? There are sort of 4 points that I look for, and sometimes it can just be one of those or all of them. First of all, I think to myself, is it credible? Is there a kind of quality and a beautiful story behind this, and something that's really worth our time and our money? I also ask myself, is it joyful? There are a lot of fragrance brands that aren't, that are too complicated, that are too complex, where the story is too difficult. And actually, when I look at the sort of focus group of my followers, it has to be easy and joyful, and also democratic. It can't be this sort of exclusive members club type difficult to understand story, because it shouldn't be like that. It should be joyful and wonderful and escapism, and it should be for everybody. Remember Jo on our panel here told me once that her favorite thing about fragrance is that fragrance fits, and it doesn't matter your heritage, your age, your BMI, your bank balance. It should be able to fit everyone. So I always look at a fragrance and think, does it fit at least sort of some types of people? And of course, you know, depending on budget, it's not going to fit everybody, but generally it should be able to fit a certain, you know, group of people. One of the most important things as well, I always ask myself is, does it read the room? I find that sometimes a fragrance will come along and find itself on my desk, and it just feeds the mood of whether it's my followers or the time of year, or just the mood and the attitude that we're all in, and whether that's a zeitgeist thing. I hate that word, but does it lean into the right mood? And sometimes all the other points that I've talked about don't need to even be part of it. If it just feels so right for right now, then I'm going to be all over it, because I know it's something that my audience are going to love. And it could be just a focus on one ingredient that people ask me about all the time, and I think, God, it's almost like it's destiny that it's arrived on my desk, and this is the fragrance that people are going to want to IV drip into their veins today. So sometimes it can just be that mood, and if it feeds a mood. So those are the reasons why something would really catch my attention.
Yeah.
That was a bit of a long answer, sorry.
No, amazing. I think that really fits. And actually, that kind of fits with Amanda, your piece that you actually won Practical Guide for was a real focus on ingredients. So is that something for your process that you look for when you decide that a product is worth looking at?
Increasingly so, yes. So everything that Alice said, I totally agree with. That's a brilliant assessment. And I'm not sure I can add much more to that. But what I will add is that I write in for my trend forecasting job, I write in a slightly different way, in that I'm looking to the future. So before we get to, as Alice calls it, destiny, which I think is a wonderful word to use, there's a lot of stuff that goes on before in the industry and in the world. So my reference points when I'm trend forecasting are society, technology, environment, politics, industry, and creativity. Now, I don't personally cover all of those. I've got the support of a big trend forecasting agency behind me, so they do all of that. So all of that for me, I'm absorbing absolutely everything in the world, and various things, as Alice called it, destiny. Various things will be important at a certain time. So I'm looking sort of 18 months to 2 years ahead as to what, when it arrives on Alice's desk, what's going to be the most important thing. So I look to everything to get inspiration and to see what's coming through and to keep an open mind. And then I sort of narrow down on what's coming through. And my general rule of thumb is, if I see something 3 times, then I'm paying attention, because that's interesting. And for me, ingredients, yes, is definitely, for various reasons, really important at the moment. Important because we're getting a lot of biotech. Sustainability is a massive, massive thing. That we hear a lot about naturals, and naturals are about the most unsustainable thing you can grow in the world. So biotech, all the big fashion, as our industry listeners will know, biotech's a really huge thing at the moment, and there'll be a lot of that coming through. I think synthetics have changed they've had a makeover, if you like, and they're now, very much an important and positive thing. So yeah, ingredients, and also there's the whole wellness angle, because neuroscience is showing that actually fragrance really can change the way your brain works. So there's a lot of things that are anchored in ingredients at the moment that make them a very important thing to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting hearing you say that you look that far in advance and that if something turns up 3 times, then it's definitely something worth looking at. And for you, Hayden, with your piece that you won Rising Star with, you really looked at kind of inspiration in art and how that connects to scent. And I was wondering if that's something that you relate to, and that's the reason why you chose it?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's so interesting hearing those other views, and for me, to be honest, it's slightly less about pulling together friends or things like that, because I don't think I'm very good at it, but also, yeah, I think for me it's sometimes getting that sort of wider lens and seeing how some of these fragrances or ideas resonate in the real world and with other people. And so yeah, things like, it was interesting, wasn't it, when we were all in lockdown, all the kind of pieces that came up around, home fragrance becoming more important, and green scents because we were craving the outside world. And of course now there's this, this idea of the cost of living crisis, the fact that, should we be looking at cheaper scents, what part do these kind of dupe fragrances play in the market? So sometimes I'm really interested in that sort of wider lens on the world outside and how that plays into fragrance. But then also, yeah, I've got a kind of marketing background and particularly music, so I love it when I love the sort of creator stories. I love finding out about the sort of narrative of fragrance. So that's the stuff that really excites me, and I kind of tune into that stuff. So often that's the inspiration when I hear about the sort of creator journey or the DNA of a brand. It kind of gets me. And sometimes it might be selfish because that's the stuff that excites me, so that's the stuff I want to write, and you just kind of hope that passion that you put in connects with other people. But yeah, so that's a wider lens on the world, and then getting excited about the creator and the kind of story of the fragrance is the stuff for me.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because at the bottom line, it is kind of a narrative, isn't it? The creation of a fragrance is a narrative. So from trend forecasting to then what's arrived and you're talking about, to then discovering kind of the backstory, all of that is really important to be highlighting and discussing. So when you are discussing and you are writing down things or creating Instagram stories and Instagram lives, what are some techniques you would suggest to those that have to translate smells into words that you apply into your own approaches? Jo, I'd love to hear from you about this, because I think how you write is really impressive in the way that you translate all of these kind of narratives into something that is really digestible.
So I have a long journalistic background, but when I write about fragrance, it's often very different. I'm not, I can report on things. And in fact, my soap prize-winning soap story this year was very much a piece of reporting on a gritty refugee project in Jordan. And I certainly never expected to win a Jasmine Award for that. But for me, it's very much about sort of cutting out my brain. Very often it's about almost channeling fragrances and smelling them, and what do they make me feel, what do they remind me of, because you are essentially trying to, you're like a butterfly catcher as a fragrance writer. You're trying to capture something and get it down on paper, and it's air anyway, it's thin air. And somehow you've got to communicate that to somebody who's not actually smelling it. And I have always found that a kind of non-intellectualized approach is best for me, very much a kind of tapping into the emotion that it makes me feel. And I think obviously that is for us, for everyone who loves fragrance, that is sense superpower. It absolutely TARDISes us back through time and space to places we've been and people we know and memories. And so I try not to think too much when I'm writing, but to feel. And so that's what always guides me. I mean, I'm perfectly capable of interviewing a perfumer and getting great quotes out of them, but actually the kind of capturing the more ephemeral side of it, and it only comes through practice. That's what I would say. I didn't start out being a fragrance writer, and I've honed my skills over the years, and it's like anything you do. Is it 4,000 hours, I think, that you're supposed to put into something? I'm not saying that you can't write about fragrance. 10,000. I'm not saying you can't write about fragrance if you haven't been doing it for 10,000 hours, but the more you do it, the better you will become at it. It is like a muscle. It does need to be flexed, and you need to smell and you need to write. And when we've run, when I was doing how to improve your sense of smell workshops for the Perfume Society, we would actually give people things to smell and just literally ask them to free associate with what it made them feel, what color it was. If it was a piece of music, what would it be? And I think that is a brilliant exercise for anybody who wants to start writing about fragrance.
Definitely. I think for lots of people that have tuned in is finding those moments to really react to something there in the moment and be able to translate that feeling and that emotion. And Alice, I mean, through your Spritz series, you're so natural at communicating your kind of instinct and an immediate response to fragrances. What's it like for you and some of the techniques that you have kind of discovered when you translate smells?
Thank you. I totally echo what Jo said. It's not easy. Like, it's not just a language that you just pick up and take off with. This is years of trying to think about to decode smells into easy to understand metaphors, and the words that I call it like the 3 T's, the ways in which I would kind of advise anyone who's watching who maybe writes press releases or has to do marketing copy. Think about the 3 T's: temperature, texture, and taste. And if you can think about those when you're putting your sort of copy together or your presentations, whatever, rather than the normal classical sort of language of fragrance, I think that really helps, because bringing temperature in can give you a sense of whether something's going to be icy or whether it's going to be like hot spices or cold spices. Like, there's a big difference between those. So using temperature is a really good way of enhancing your fragrance language without getting too exclusive and sort of too technical. Texture is one of my favorite ways of sort of talking about fragrance, because we all understand the texture of like sort of fluffy baby powder, or the texture of watercolor paper, and giving a sort of texture to a fragrance can help you almost sort of feel it on your skin and feel it, how it's going to almost how it's going to smell, because some textures have that real sort of sensorial effect. Taste is another big one. I'm very into food and cooking, but I tend to use a lot of flavor chat when I'm talking about fragrance, because they have the same sort of, there's a link, isn't there, when you talk about something that's creamy, or that can be, you know, those sorts of words can help you to develop the idea of a smell and make it more relatable, because actually using metaphors is going to be so much easier for people to understand what something smells like than to go through the list of ingredients like top, heart, base. I mean, that's like reading out a cake recipe. There's baking powder, there are eggs, there's self-raising flour. That doesn't actually tell you how that fragrance smells, because you could have something with rose in it and that might put people off, and actually it's just a seasoning. So try to not look at, so if you, for instance, I'm talking to people who may be like my pals who have to write press releases or marketing copy. If you get sent like a list of ingredients, don't focus too much on that, because actually some of them are sort of conceptual accords, and you know, a sandalwood might smell very damp and creamy, but it could be quite sort of flinty as well. So smell the perfume and stay with it. And as Jo said, let it kind of let yourself feel the emotions of it rather than the prescriptive recipe list, because that's just nothing. That's bland and nothing. And no one really out there, if you say the word vetiver, most people who are outside of this sort of tight circle of fragrance people have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. But if you talk about, you know, fresh, like earthy, dry grass, you know, that sort of, those sorts of words, you don't need to list any ingredients. Likewise, a Sunday morning hangover busting tonic splashy citrus blast, you don't actually list any notes in there, but you get a much more definite sense of what that's going to be in the bottle, rather than going bergamot, lemon, tangerine, you know, that just sends you straight to sleep. So I tend to think, have your little list of ingredients there, great, but actually smell it, feel it, and make references to like cultural things that people understand, like baby powder, or, you know, apricot yacht play, kind of petit filou. Those sorts of smells and textures feel much more connective and relatable than a list of ingredients.
Absolutely.
And don't be frightened to come out with a sort of wacky reference, because actually chances are people will understand that way better than any sort of fancy words.
Definitely, absolutely. And the thing is, like, for a lot of people that are outside of this world, sense of smell is something that's completely overlooked. People much connect with, like you're saying, texture, the feeling of things, what they're seeing, and can connect it to an emotion or something like that. People kind of forget about sense of smell. So it's how do we then bring that to life through other things that people know. So Tamara, I would love to know what is an area of fragrance that you think is overlooked then, and that you think consumers would eagerly want to know more about, and how do you suggest we approach highlighting this?
Funny enough, I was just thinking about when we meet perfumers, I feel a bit sorry for them because we bombard them with all the questions we want to know. And I think transparency is a huge issue. So we want to know, you know, what actually is in the bottle. Well, first of all, because I think sustainability is relevant now and looking forward, it's just going to increase. People really want to know, is my bottle refillable? Can it be recycled? What is actually in it? I mean, Amanda was mentioning, you know, what's the synthetic? What is the natural? They just want to have a lot more knowledge. And I think this lovely, you know, we were probably all drawn to perfume when we were small because of the smoke and mirrors image, because we love the stories and we do love storytelling. But I think the other side is we actually want to know what's going on, even down to, you know, who is growing my, you know, who grows my roses? Where are they coming from? How are they produced? Are the people treated who are growing my roses? I think this is the conversations are really relevant and really important. I was saying to Amanda the other day, we met a perfumer, and I felt a bit sorry just because he was surrounded and we were going, what's this, what's that? But I think it's really relevant. I think that is part of the story. So I think how to make it relevant is it's not an add-on, and increasingly it'll be the starting point. So when we meet particularly new brand owners or people who are just starting their first collections, this is just part, it's just naturally part of it. So the new collections are having these conversations. I think it's much harder for the really big corporate companies. It's sort of almost like turning around a big ocean liner. They are doing it. It is coming. But I think, you know, this is the big issue at the moment.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like you're saying, it's kind of adding on to what's already there and not just focusing on the ingredients like we've discussed, and kind of using that discovery of the brand. And Hayden, I mean, very similar to then what your kind of piece was about that you won the Rising Star Award with, is that narrative, is what consumers are interested in. So what else do you think is overlooked then that consumers would want to know more about?
Well, I think as I'm the only male on the panel, I should kind of represent my brothers. And yeah, I just feel sometimes that for men, I'm not talking about sort of particularly gendered fragrances, but I'm a sort of real evangelist I'm quite new to this, so I'm much earlier in my 10,000 hours journey than some of the people on the panel. But what I found in these last few years, I've just got so, you know, fallen down the rabbit hole, got so excited about this world, and I want my little mission is to share it with more people, and especially the conversations I have with my mates and guys. I just feel like a lot of men are missing out on the amazing world of sort of gender-free fragrances. And again, it doesn't have to be particularly niche or expensive, but I think there's still this kind of misconception that the guys have to go over to that aisle in Superdrug and the women over there, or, you know, the same in a department store. And I just wish, and you know, the fragrances that I've grown to love and that I'm into, I want to kind of shine a light on these amazing fragrances that don't have to be about gender, and these amazing stories of creativity and brilliance and technical know-how and all this stuff. I found it fascinating, and, you know, selfishly I want to sort of spread that message. So I think, yeah, just for men, how can I shine a light and open this amazing world to men a bit more, and show that it's a kind of welcoming, non-scary place. And I think sometimes, you know, you go into those stores and as a man, you don't necessarily feel particularly welcome. So how can we kind of retrofit that there's more information, you know, on websites and online, and then what can we do about the in-store and online experience that makes it more accessible and welcoming to men? So that's my mission.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that, actually, because I was just thinking, you know, a lot of the new brand founders and a lot of perfumers are obviously men. So it's really bizarre that there is that kind of difference of people, the people that are creating them to then not resonating, because I guess there is the audience that's already set up through marketing, etc., that is focused on women. And for all of us, we know that fragrance is completely for me, it's completely unisex. It just is dependent on how you feel, how the fragrance makes you feel. But it's so important, like you say, to be able to kind of break down that misconception that
and it was like Alice was saying about, you know, the kind of language we're using. And I think, you know, is it even more the case for men that the less we talk about raw materials and ingredients and all those things that put up barriers and make it less welcoming, you know, the more we're talking in a language that people understand, the better, and therefore the more people that can come into this amazing world. So
Absolutely. I think it's so important. So then, Jo, how do we break down that jargon and ensure that what we are contributing to the scene is really digestible and relevant for the people that are interested?
Well, actually, I would slightly take issue with one of the things that Hayden just said, because interestingly, I have seen that I've seen quite a lot of guys who've gotten into fragrance and become quite nerdy about it, and actually are more interested in the notes and what goes on under the bonnet than perhaps women are, and it might possibly be that men are less used to talking about how things make them feel. I think women are very used to talking about how things make us feel. I'm not sure that a lot of men have quite come so far on that journey with us. And so
I can't stop talking about my feelings. I'm always.
But that's why we love you, Hayden. But you're not necessarily typical. And so actually, I think that for men, you kind of have to have an either or approach. You have to make it accessible in two ways, because I definitely know, and we used to see this all the time when we did run these how to improve your sense of smell workshops, was guys getting so much more interested in the technical side of it than women do. Women just, it's like, oh my God, this makes me feel, like I can walk into any room or whatever. And guys are like, well, yes, what is vetiver, and where does it come from? And I mean, this is a genuine thing. So I think for men, there's a split actually. But how do we de-jargonize it? I mean, I think about 1 in 5,000 people, if you stop them in the street and said, what does chypre mean? I mean, it's
the offside rule of perfumery, isn't it?
It really
now we're talking.
It's, there are these phrases, but how do we? That is the language of fragrance. It is still, you still do have to kind of categorize fragrances by family. Not least because once you have finally twigged that you are a chypre person, or you're a ombre person, or a fresh person, that is probably the fragrance family that you're going to be drawn to time and time and time again. I mean, personally, I think we should be looking way earlier in life. And, I would love to see something like they have in France, which is they have a week devoted to the senses. And we have nothing like that, which seems insane to me, because, now you can Google the capital of Peru. We should really be teaching kids about things that are much more to do with real life, and obviously a connection with your senses. I think particularly against a landscape where we are so disconnected from our senses so much of the time. The kids are on their screens, they're looking at a screen, so anything that can bring them back into their body and make them aware that they are, a human being is really, really important. So I mean, I think that for many years the Fragrance Foundation was doing a great job on this before the pandemic, with the Marty the Mighty Nose sort of outreach to schools, getting kids to write poems about fragrance. And I think so for me, that's where it's all got to begin moving forward, is actually to big up the sense of smell and probably the sense of taste when our kids are in school. Because, I think that everyone on this panel feels, we feel a sort of sense of responsibility to bring people through this, or to invite them through the back of the wardrobe into Narnia, which is this fragrance world that we all love and we all exist in. And we want as many people in the back of that wardrobe with us as possible, because we know the amazing amount of pleasure that it can give us in daily life. So for me, I would love to see this all starting much, much earlier. And then maybe we can work towards developing some kind of language that isn't quite so scary to people, also, arcane, the chypres and the fougères, etc. But for now, that is the only kind of categorization that we have, and I think we slightly have to live with that for the moment until somebody comes up with something better.
No, absolutely. I mean, education is really important. And like you say, with Marty the Mighty Nose, it was something that the Fragrance Foundation UK really was interested in, and something that we are constantly in trying to develop and outreach to those kind of ages where they are. Yeah, Amanda, I'd love to hear from you about this same topic, and also how brands can kind of influence the way we break down jargon and can reach consumers more in a more digestible way.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to say I'm quite excited by the amount of brands and the big fragrance houses who are starting to take education a bit more seriously. it's a baby step towards getting a better language for fragrance. But do we all know Wiki Perfumes, that was launched by Pooch recently? That's really exciting, how, you know, people such as Pooch or the IFF or Givaudan are putting online much more information about the workings of fragrance, enabling, you know, people who are writing the press releases, or brands who want to sort of, you know, put together a mood board or whatever about a new fragrance. They can sort of be a bit more helpful to anyone to have a better knowledge, even if it's sort of surface level. It's a start. And I think Coty are starting a new dictionary, I believe, which is all about taking, you know, beauty ingredients and beauty myths, shall we call them, rather than other rude words we could apply, to try and break those down and to sort of make it better. So I think there's movement within the industry, I think, to change things, particularly on fragrance, which is interesting. So yeah, just wanted to put that out there.
No, definitely. I think it is really impressive that these kind of big corporations are jumping onto education and using it as a good, powerful tool to break down the jargon. Yes, sorry, Magic.
Oh, sorry, just one last thing. I just remembered the other thing I was wanting to say was just on Joe's point around boys and men. I think that I've got 3 sons and a husband, and not one of them doesn't love fragrance. Once you get them in, you really get them in, and they're really keen. I've never met a single person, once I've had my way with them, who has gone, oh no, this really doesn't interest me anymore. People are absolutely fascinated by fragrance. And if you can talk to, you know, I've had friends around, or just on a sort of anecdotal level, when you start talking, people are really interested. So one of my big bugbears is that there's a gap between the perfect perfume for you and how to get it. And I think we've got a lot to go. Brands need to work on the retail end a lot. The communication end we're sort of covering a little bit here, but there's also another step. There's how you give that beautiful storytelling and the beautiful fragrance to the consumer, because if you try and buy it in the UK, it's very hard to buy fragrance in a nice way. I was speaking to a perfumer this morning who said, I think for the 40 years I've been in fragrance, no one has loved the way we sell fragrance. So that, to me, is a big, big gap to fill. So I think that's worth brands taking on board.
But I think that talks to that point that Joe was making. I absolutely agree that men can, you know, get into something and kind of get quite nerdy about it. Absolutely. But I think that it's that point, isn't it? That what's the sort of ramp that gets you into that world? And if it's sports cars, it's driving around with your family. If it's football, it's watching a game or having a kick around as a kid. So, you know, what are those touch points? What are those places that allow you into the world? Because it's not, for a guy, it's not going to happen just by strolling through a House of Fraser. It's not. So yeah, it's what are the sort of ways that lure you in, I think.
Yeah, the audience is there. It's just how do we grab them? So Tamara, how do you think we can do that?
I was going to refer back to what Alice was saying, and making language more relatable and connecting to the things that we all know and love. So, you know, part of Amanda and I, we love fashion, style, arts, music, wider cultural things. And so relating it to kind of what Alice is saying is like, you know, what music you listen to, which Hayden connects to as well. And yes, there is sort of like the nerdy side, but I think we try and just have a natural, normal conversation that like you would discuss your favorite scarf, jumper, you know, what do you listen to on the radio, or like anything else. So bring it into everyday life. I love the Yoplait reference, Alice.
No, it's all so important and so relevant. And I think you're right, the way that retailers do have approached kind of the sales of fragrance, it kind of, you know, in how you think about, if you're going into a shop, you think that somebody's immediately going to be there wanting to spray you with something and just ask you straight away, oh, do you want this? Or, you know, how does this, you know, how is it? That kind of thing. And it needs to be more than that. It needs to be engaging with, like you're saying, the narrative, the story, the emotion. There's so much that goes on behind behind a fragrance. So it can't just be all released in one spray as you walk into a shop. So with that, kind of to finish this amazing panel and this amazing discussion, I'd love to know from each of you really how you think that fragrance has evolved and how you would hope the fragrance industry is kind of moving in to the future, and its different focuses and different intentions. Should we start with you, Alice?
Okay. Before I go into that, I just wanted to almost talk to anyone who's watching who has members of staff who sell fragrance on counter. And that's a really tricky thing to do if you're quite frightened about the language of fragrance. And just a bit of advice, which tends to be the kind of thing that I would suggest if I was doing like a training day with staff, is that try and ask your customer how they want to wear that fragrance, and build a scenario. Ask them, where do you wear your fragrance? What type of fragrance, like what type of scenario do you want to scent yourself in? And it could be a sort of cocktails in a fancy hotel. It could be, I just want something for the school run. It could be, I just want a special occasion weekend going out on a Saturday night. So try and put your customer into a space where they would wear a beautiful fragrance. Or if they want something affordable and pocket friendly, you know, rather than saying, okay, so what notes do you like and what's on your dressing table already, you know, that's that's an easy way of doing it. But if you want to match somebody with something that they don't have already, try to put them in the scenario where they would want to wear fragrance. Sorry, I just thought of that. But what was the question? So moving forward, I think that a big part of any new luxury brand, actually any type of brand launch, there needs to be a purpose involved, whether that's a sort of charitable purpose or a give back purpose or a percentage of sales. There has to be a purposeful element to your launch, because there's no question there shouldn't be that. It has to have something beyond, well, we're artisans and it's fabulous and it's all natural, blah, blah, blah. There needs to be something more. We need something more out of this. Every luxury brand needs to have purpose at its forefront and part of its conversation. I think that the language, what you were saying, Amanda, was so interesting. The language of synthetics is, I mean, synthetic is such a weird word. In sort of skincare and makeup, it's like the devil. But in fragrance, it's so progressive and it's so positive and it's wonderful and it's hugely sustainable. But I just hope that brands feel more confident to talk about that in a really positive way, and using words like biotech and, you know, nature mimic. And there are all sorts of ways you can talk about synthetics in a less sort of, I mean, it's not a great word, is it? There are ways to do it in a nicer way, but have the confidence to say, we're not a natural brand, because that's not actually the best way to produce a product. And yeah, moving forward, I think that brands need to think about fragrance in a more personal way. So people wearing fragrance for themselves rather than for other people. It's not about impressing anyone. It's not about, you know, making you feel something that you're other. Just it's to enhance your very sort of mood of that day, and to really understand that your customer, your consumer, will probably have a wardrobe rather than, this is your signature one and we're going to put so much pressure on you to love this. Just ease off and just slot your perfume in a typical person's wardrobe where it could fit really nicely, and not put so much pressure on, this is the one that you've been waiting for your whole life. And to think about it more, yeah, on a personal and an emotional level, that people wear fragrance for self-care, for going through grieving process, for feeling more than they are that day, for to stop feelings of isolation. You know, that fragrance is a real tool for happiness and for self-care, and to really think about that when you're trying to push fragrance onto customers, that it's not just to get laid.
No, definitely. I mean, fragrance is part of us. It is really emotive. Amanda, would you agree? Is that what you hope to see fragrance kind of leading us towards that path in the future?
Yes. So all of what Alice said, again, I think that the key drivers for me at the moment, apart from sustainability, which is like an underlying thing, which I know people get really bored with me saying it, but it's an underlying thing. If you've not got a sustainable brand, people are not going to, in 5 years' time, you're not going to be in business. But the big drivers for me are wellness, because wellness isn't going anywhere. It's a big, huge thing that's going to continue to be impressive in fragrance, in that the neuroscience will come out to show all sorts of interesting things, that we can be happier, we can be more grounded, but in a bigger way than that, really. It's not just about, making yourself feel good. It's actually going to be about sensescaping your entire life. So you'll have your home sense, you'll have your olfactory bubble that you'll wander around life in. There's a great brand we saw recently called Never Go Alone, was that it? Which was taken rituals like the wet wipe, which everyone has a very controversial view on, but they'd really elevated it to this rather beautiful thing. And I just thought, as a ritual going forward, that's how wellness will seep into our lives. We'll be looking for a scent profile in our wet wipes that is beautiful, that is going to do something for you, so sort of therapeutic approach. So that, I think, is huge. And I think also self-identity, tying in a little bit to what Alice was saying there, people are becoming much more confident about picking a fragrance to reinforce who they are. Particularly, I'm really heartened to see how Gen Z are approaching fragrance. I'm not a big TikTok user myself, but I read a lot about it, and Perfume Talk is extremely interesting to see how many young people are obsessed with fragrance in a way that I don't think I've seen a demographic be so enthusiastic for ever. I mean, they really, really love fragrance. So I think that's very heartening. And I think it's brands' responsibility to shake off those old ideas of how we used to talk about fragrance to young people, and see how innovative and creative this demographic is, and provide stuff that works for them, that helps them be themselves, that allows them to layer fragrances to create something that's specifically for them, rather than try and force an old adage onto them. And one thing I'd like to add, actually, is that just back to that whole thing about language and what we use and how we talk, if anyone ever starts a fragrance feature referencing Proust's Madeleines, I switch off.
They're not going to win a Jasmine Award.
Never use that again. It's overused beyond measure. So enough with Madeleines.
There you go. You've heard it first. Jo, what do you think then, the future of fragrance? Do you agree? And from what Alice had said about giving back, obviously your piece really focused on that, on how fragrance provides an opportunity for education as well, in terms of how communities can use fragrance for health purposes and wellness. So do you hope that that's the way that fragrance is leading?
Yes, I mean, I totally agree with the idea that perfume has to have a purpose now. It is going to be what people are looking for. And what I would say to brands, it's interesting because there's actually a lot more going on that front, on the kind of social and sustainability front, sometimes that the brands let on. You've got certain brands who come out and say what they're doing, and as an entrepreneur, as someone who's in business, as someone who founded Green and Blacks, and understands that sustainability is a journey, and it's a journey in which the goalposts also move quite often. And so I think that brands should, without fear, I think you can get around, people are terrified of greenwashing. They're terrified of being accused of greenwashing. But I think it's really important that every brand does share what it's doing, but in a particular way, which is a kind of transparent, authentic way that says, this is a journey. We're making baby steps. We're not where we want you to be, but we're going to take you on this journey with you. And we're going to tell you when we achieve things and what we want to achieve, while admitting that we're not perfect. And I think the perfect is often the enemy of the good when it comes to this kind of thing. And so brands are so terrified that they're going to be taken to task for the fact that you can't recycle the spray bit of their bottle, that they don't talk about the fact that the bottle is, you know, uses 50% less glass than it used to a few years ago. And what I would say is that, you know, the big brands, and I think L'Oreal are making some amazing efforts on this front. A small brand can make a small difference, and hallelujah, but a big brand can cause a revolution, you know. And also the big brands can go to glass manufacturers, componentry manufacturers, and put pressure on them in the way that a little startup niche brand can never do. So I'm very heartened by what I see, but I wish there was more talk around that, and more honesty, and more actually just coming out and saying, this is what we're doing and we're quite proud of it, but we know we're not perfect yet. But it did make me laugh about what Alice said about perfumes not just to get you laid, because I think that all of us in the pandemic kind of felt that fragrance sales were going to fall off a cliff, because we're not going out, so why would people want fragrance? Well, of course, what we saw was exactly the opposite, because at the end of the day, and fragrance marketing has never shown this in its projections, we wear fragrance for ourselves. We just wear it for ourselves, to make ourselves feel good, and to, as Alice says, to give us backbone or whatever. And yet it's hilarious if you look at fragrance advertising down the decades, and even now, it's all about, you know, finding Mr. Right, or being swept off your feet, or, you know, it's completely, it's like there's a sort of mass delusion about why people buy perfume.
Absolutely. And yeah, Hayden, I was actually going to come to you on that, in terms of the marketing side of things. It is kind of ridiculous how it is, and we need, like Joe's saying, we need that refreshing, kind of transparent, honest, authentic approach to the way we communicate. So what do you hope the future will look like?
Yeah, I can only echo what the others have said about, you know, and having a teenager myself, so, you know, seeing Gen Z and their aspirations and the kind of things that they're wanting and seeing on social media and elsewhere. It does seem, you know, and I wrote an article about this recently, that, you know, the kind of traditional marketing that's in fragrance just feels it's not fit for purpose anymore, you know. And all these things we've talked about fragrances being about self and making yourself feel good. The idea, you know, it seems slightly ridiculous now that, you know, again, in men's fragrance, that there'll be some, you know, male model with his top off and holding a trophy, or Brad Pitt or George Clooney or whoever it is. I don't know if it might just be me. I'm just not interested in whether George Clooney wears it or Brad Pitt wears it, or I don't care about if anybody else wears it. And I think, you know, and it actually becomes quite troubling if the marketing has those sort of elements of, you know, sexual allure and completely sort of, you know, the sort of binary gender thing, that the Gen Z are just not going to have it, and they'll end up, you know, favoring and finding brands that talk to them in an authentic way, not the brands that are just still serving up the same kind of formula of advertising and marketing that they did 30, 40 years ago. It just, you know, things have evolved, and I think, you know, it's our job to make sure we're in touch with the younger generation without being like, hey, groovy daddy, and just, you know, coming up with all the wrong kind of chat, but just to listen, and lo and behold, this kind of generation, they're much more savvy and they're much more welcoming and inclusive. And I'm learning that stuff from my son, I think. So it's certainly the duty of marketeers and brands to reflect that and represent that in the future, and I hope they do.
Absolutely. And finally, Tamara, what do you hope that the future of fragrance will look like?
Well, just to continue on from all your points, but particularly we're saying, okay, we want, you know, the perfume in the bottle to be for everybody. I would like to see on the other side more diverse perfumers. I'd like to see things change hugely on that side of things. So that's my wish.
Absolutely, so important. And yeah, okay, Alice, we'll finish
So
on
a very, very tiny quick point to refer back to what Jo was saying about these larger corporations. I see a lot of the time small independent niche brands dissing the larger corporations, and that's not okay, because they're paving the way so that you can be niche and independent and fabulous. Like all of those big corporations, Coty, L'Oreal, Lauder Group, all of those big ones are doing all the work for fair trade, sustainability, packaging, like amazing technology, like UV sort of layers inside bottles so that you don't have to put preservatives in them. It's fascinating and so important and massive. And they're doing all the hard work so that smaller brands can benefit from that. So if you are, whoever's out there, a small independent niche brand, and you think it's a good idea and makes you sort of appear cool to position yourself as way more superior and more intellectual than a mass brand, that's a big mistake, because actually don't kick the hand that feeds you. You know, what's the expression? That. But yeah, there is so much positive information and work being done by all those big corporations, and we are, all of us, huge supporters of that, because we couldn't showcase the breadth of brands without them doing all the hard work.
I think that's a perfect way to kind of sum up what we've discussed, because we're a community. Bottom line, the fragrance community is fabulous. We all should support each other. We all should get behind each other. And the only way we're going to progress the industry is by being open and honest, and having new, refreshing ways of communicating fragrances, listening, as Hayden said, to what Gen Z are after, becoming more diverse. And it's a really, really exciting time. I just want to say thank you all so much for joining us. Your insights have been amazing. It's a really exciting time as well here at the Fragrance Foundation UK as we count down to the Fragrance Foundation Awards, where amongst that we'll be announcing our 2023 Jasmine Award winners. So good luck to everybody that's entered into that. And keep an eye out on our social channels for the finalist announcements, which will take place during National Fragrance Week, where the celebrations of fragrance will continue. That's from the 20th to the 26th of March. So we're really excited to continue the celebrations. And again, just want to reiterate a huge thank you. The discussion today has been absolutely brilliant. I could stay on here and talk to you all for hours, but I'll let you get on with your days. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.